sign this medical power of attorney, or we will petition the court to put you in an assisted living facility by the end of the month. Those were the exact words my son and his wife spat at me in my own kitchen. After 72 years of living a proud, independent life, I was given an ultimatum by my own flesh and blood. I signed their document, but I typed it myself, and I added one specific, legally binding sentence they didn't bother to read. 5 days later, their lawyer called me. His voice was tight with panic. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. But let me take you back to the beginning. They say blood is thicker than water, but in my experience, money is the thickest of all. It can clog the veins of a family until the heart stops beating entirely. My name is Wilma Davis. I am 72 years old. And until last week, I thought I knew my son. I thought I knew the boy I raised, the man whose scraped knees I bandaged, and whose college tuition I paid for by working double shifts. But as I sat across from him and his wife, Leah, at my dining room table, looking at the papers they shoved toward me, I realized I was looking at a stranger. To understand why I'm telling you this, and why their lawyer won't stop calling my phone today, you have to understand what my life was like before the vultures circled. I live in San Diego, California. I have a cozy 3-bedroom Spanish-style bungalow that sits on a 1/4-acre lot. My husband, rest his soul, and I bought this place 40 years ago. It's fully paid off. Not a dime owed to the bank. It is my sanctuary. I spend my mornings tending to my hydrangeas and my afternoons reading mystery novels on the back patio. I am not frail. I am not senile. I drive my own car, I do my own grocery shopping, and I manage my own checkbook. I have built a fulfilling, independent life here. But when you get to be my age, people stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a liability, or in the case of my daughter-in-law, an asset to be liquidated. The trouble started with a dizzy spell. That's all it was. I had been gardening in the midday sun a little too long without drinking enough water. I stood up too fast, got lightheaded, and had to sit down on the grass. A neighbor saw me and, out of an abundance of caution, called an ambulance. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was fine. I drank a glass of lemonade and told them to go home. I didn't even go to the hospital, but naturally my son found out. 2 days later, Christopher and Leah's car pulled into my driveway. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up, marching up the walkway with grim expressions. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't ask how I was feeling. They brought a leather briefcase and a heavy sense of doom. "Mom, we need to talk," Christopher said. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He was looking at the floor, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Leah, however, looked right at me. She looked at me. Then she looked at the antique china cabinet in the corner, then at the hardwood floors. It felt like she was appraising the place. She sat down at the head of the table, my husband's seat, and clasped her hands. "Wilma," she started, her voice dripping with that fake, condescending sweetness people use on toddlers. "We were terrified when we heard about your fall. Terrified." "It wasn't a fall, Leah," I corrected her, pouring myself a cup of tea. "I didn't offer them any. I sat down. There is a difference." "It's a warning sign," she snapped, dropping the sweetness instantly. "You are 72 living alone in a big house. It's irresponsible. Christopher and I have been talking, and we can't sleep at night worrying about you." Christopher nodded like a bobblehead doll. "It's true, Mom. We're just worried." "I appreciate the concern," I said firmly, "but I am fine." Leah unzipped the briefcase. The sound was sharp, like a zipper closing on a body bag. She pulled out a thick stack of documents and slid them across the polished wood of the table. "We aren't here to argue, Wilma. We are here to fix this. We need to be proactive. I looked down at the bold text on the top page. Medical power of attorney. What is this? I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. It authorizes Christopher and me to make healthcare decisions for you, Leah explained, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. In case you have another episode, it allows us to talk to your doctors, manage your treatments, and ensure you're safe. I can talk to my own doctors, I said, pushing the paper back. I don't need a babysitter. Leah pushed the paper back toward me, harder this time. This isn't a request, Wilma. It's a necessity. I looked at my son. Christopher, do you agree with this? You want to take away my right to choose my own doctor, my own care? Christopher looked pained. Mom, it's just a precaution, just in case. It's more than a precaution, Leah interrupted. It is the only way we can ensure you don't end up hurting yourself. We need full control over your medical decisions so we can manage your care properly. And if I refuse? I asked. The air in the room went cold. Leah leaned forward. Her eyes were hard. If you refuse, Wilma, we will have no choice. We will file a petition with the court to have you declared incompetent. We will testify that you are a danger to yourself, and we will have you placed in an assisted living facility immediately. My breath caught in my throat. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They weren't just asking for help. They were holding my freedom hostage. You would put me in a home. I whispered, looking at Christopher. You would take me out of my own house. It's for your own good, Leah said, answering for him. The court will grant it. A lonely old woman falling in her yard. It's an open and shut case. But if you sign this paper, we can keep you here. We can manage things quietly as a family. You stay in your house, but we call the shots on your health. I looked at my son, begging silently for him to defend me, but he just stared at his hands. He was letting her do this. He was letting his wife threaten to lock his mother away unless I signed over my rights. I felt a mixture of hot anger and cold betrayal. They weren't acting like family. They were acting like legal agents executing a hostile takeover. They wanted control. And looking at Leah's eyes scanning my living room again, I had a sinking suspicion they wanted control of more than just my blood pressure medication. So that's the choice, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Sign this paper or get dragged out of my home? It's not a choice, Wilma. Leah smiled, a thin, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's an ultimatum. The silence that filled my house after Christopher and Leah left was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence I was used to, the kind that settles in after a long day of gardening. This was a suffocating silence, the kind that screams of danger. I sat in my husband's chair for a long time, just staring at the empty space where they had been standing. My mind was racing. Assisted living. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked around at my living room, the photos on the mantelpiece, the rug I bought in Morocco 30 years ago, the scratches on the door frame from when Christopher was a puppy. This wasn't just a house. It was my life. And they were threatening to take it all away with a single court order. I knew they could do it. I've seen it happen to friends. A slip here, a forgotten name there, and suddenly the family descends like wolves. They paint a picture of a confused old woman who can't be trusted with a stove, let alone a bank account. And the judges, often overworked and seeing only the concerned family members, sign the papers. I would be put in a sterile room with a view of a parking lot, and Leah would be here measuring my curtains for her own windows. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away angrily. No, I wasn't going to cry. Crying is for people who have given up. I walked into my study. It's a small room off the kitchen where I keep my bills and correspondence. My late husband, Arthur, used to spend hours in here. Arthur was a careful man. He was an accountant for 40 years, and he taught me everything I know about money and people. I could almost hear his voice in the room. Wilma, he used to say, never sign a contract you didn't write yourself. And if you have to sign one, make sure the fine print hurts them more than it hurts you. I sat down at my desk. I don't use those modern tablets or smartphones. I have a desktop computer that's about 8 years old. It's clunky and the fan hums loud enough to wake the dead, but it has a sturdy keyboard that clicks satisfyingly when you hit the keys. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. I knew I had to give them what they wanted. If I fought them flat out, they would drag me to court. I didn't have the energy or the heart to fight my own son in front of a judge. It would break me. So I had to surrender. But Arthur's voice was still in my head. Surrender is just a strategy, Wilma. It's not the end. I began to type. I typed the header in bold, capital letters, medical power of attorney and guardianship authorization. I typed the date. Then I started the body of the letter. I kept the language formal, the way Leah liked it. She liked things to sound official. It made her feel important. I, Wilma Davis, being of sound mind and body, hereby authorize my son Christopher Davis and his wife Leah Davis to act as my medical proxies. They are granted full authority to make all healthcare decisions on my behalf, including but not limited to surgical procedures, medication management, and facility placement, should I become incapacitated. I stopped. My hands hovered over the keys. That was it. That was what they wanted. If I printed it now, I was handing them the keys to my life. They could put me in the most expensive nursing home in the state, drain my savings to pay for it, and then sell my house when the money ran out. They would burn through everything Arthur and I had saved, and they wouldn't care because it wasn't their money. It wasn't their money. A cold, hard realization settled in my chest. That was the weak spot. Leah didn't care about my health. She cared about my inheritance. She wanted control of the assets, but she didn't want the burden of the cost. I looked at the blinking cursor. I needed a shield. I needed something that would make them think twice before making frivolous decisions with my life. I hit the enter key twice to start a new paragraph. I adjusted my glasses. However, I whispered to myself as I typed. I decided to frame it as a quality assurance clause. Make it sound like I was doing them a favor, giving them the highest level of authority. I typed slowly, choosing every word with the precision of a surgeon, to ensure that the guardians are empowered to seek the absolute highest quality of care without restriction from insurance limitations or estate liquidity. It sounded good, flattering, even. It sounded like I wanted them to have the freedom to spend whatever was necessary. Leah would love that. Then came the hook. The appointed guardians, Christopher Davis and Leah Davis, hereby agree to assume full personal financial liability for all medical debts, hospital bills, surgical costs, and facility fees incurred under their direction. I read it again. Assume full personal financial liability. That meant if they used this piece of paper to order a surgery, they were the ones agreeing to pay for it. If they used this paper to put me in a home, they were the guarantors. Not my estate. Not my insurance. Them. Personally, I wasn't done. I added one more sentence to seal it tight. This financial assumption is a condition of the medical authority granted herein and cannot be severed from the powers exercised. I sat back. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum. It was a poison pill. If they just wanted to help me, if they truly just wanted to make sure I was safe, this clause wouldn't matter. A loving son would pay anything to save his mother. But if they were greedy, if they were just looking for a payday, this clause would ruin them. I printed 2 copies, the printer word, and spat out the warm pages. I took a pen and signed my name at the bottom of both. The next morning, At 9 a.m. sharp, they were back. Christopher looked tired, like he hadn't slept. Guilt, maybe? Or just the stress of waiting for his inheritance. Leah looked fresh and sharp, like a shark that smelled blood in the water. Well, Leah asked, stepping into the hallway without waiting to be invited. Did you make the right decision, Wilma? I did, I said. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the papers from the counter. My hand was steady. I was surprised by my own calm. I thought about what you said. You're right. I can't risk another fall. I need to know someone is looking out for me. Leah's face relaxed into a triumphant smirk. She nudged Christopher. See, I told you she would be reasonable. I decided to type it up myself, I said, holding the papers out. I wanted to make sure it was done in my own words. It felt more personal that way. Leah snatched the papers from my hand. As long as it's legal, Wilma, that's all that matters. She glanced at the document. She saw the bold header. She saw the first paragraph, granting them power. Her eyes lit up. She didn't read the second paragraph. She was too busy looking at the signature line to see if I had already signed it. This looks standard, she said, waving it at Christopher. She authorized us. Christopher took the paper. Mom, are you sure? You're okay with this? I just want what's best for everyone. I said softly. It wasn't a lie. I did want what was best. And what was best was for them to learn a very hard lesson. Just sign it, Chris. Leah snapped, pulling a pen from her purse. We have to get this notarized and filed with her doctor before noon. Christopher placed the paper on the kitchen counter. He was standing right there, under the bright fluorescent light. The words assume full personal financial liability were right there, black ink on white paper, staring him in the face. All he had to do was read. All he had to do was take 10 seconds to care about what he was signing. But he didn't. He looked at me, gave a weak, apologetic smile, and then looked down at the signature line. Okay, Mom, he said, we'll take care of you. He scrawled his signature. Leah signed right next to him, with a flourish. I watched the ink dry. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, a mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction. They had come into my home to take my freedom. They thought they had trapped a helpless old woman. Christopher handed the copy back to me. Keep this one for your records, Mom. We'll take the other one. Thank you, Christopher, I said. I feel safer already. They left 5 minutes later, clutching that piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. They had no idea they had just signed a confession. They had no idea that the control they were so desperate for came with a price tag they couldn't afford. I locked the door behind them. I went back to my study and filed my copy of the document in the folder marked insurance and legal. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to spring it. And knowing Leah, I wouldn't have to wait very long. It didn't take long for the other shoe to drop. 2 weeks after I signed the papers, my hip finally gave out. It was an old injury, a nagging ache that turned into a sharp, grinding pain I couldn't ignore. I knew what it meant. I needed a replacement. In the past, I would have handled this quietly. I would have scheduled a consultation with Dr. Evans, a kind man who has treated me for 15 years. I would have arranged for a standard hospital room, checked my Medicare coverage to see what was deductible, and asked my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, to feed my cat while I recovered. I would have been practical. I would have been frugal. But I wasn't in charge anymore. When I arrived at the hospital for the pre-surgical consultation, I wasn't alone. Christopher drove, and Leah sat in the passenger seat, clutching that thick folder of legal documents like a weapon. We sat in Dr. Evans' office. The walls were lined with diplomas, and the air smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Dr. Evans looked at my x-rays, and then turned his kindly face toward me. Well, Wilma, he said gently, it looks like it's time. The joint is bone on bone. I recommend we schedule the surgery for early next month. Now, regarding the recovery options. Actually, doctor, Leah interrupted. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like glass. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Christopher. She stared straight at the doctor and slapped the folder onto his desk. We'll be handling the decisions from here on out. Dr. Evans blinked, confused. He looked at me. Wilma? I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him I was still capable of understanding English, but Leah spoke over me. We have medical power of attorney, she announced, opening the folder to the page with the signatures. She pointed to the date. Wilma is getting older, and, frankly, she's become a bit overwhelmed by the details. Christopher and I are in charge of her care plan now. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment. I am sitting right here, Leah, I said, my voice tight. Now, Mom, don't get agitated, Christopher said, patting my arm in a way that felt patronizing. Rest your voice. Let us handle the stress. Dr. Evans looked at the document. He scanned it, frowned slightly, but nodded. He's a surgeon, not a lawyer. If the paperwork is signed, he has to follow it. Very well, he said, his tone shifting to something more professional and distant. What are your questions? We want the best for Wilma, Leah said, smoothing her skirt. Absolutely no cutting corners. I want her to have the premium experience. The surgery is standard, Dr. Evans explained. But for the post-operative stay, we have a few options. Most patients stay in a double room, which is fully covered by her insurance. It's comfortable, and the care is excellent. A double room? Leah wrinkled her nose, as if he had suggested I sleep in a dumpster. With a roommate? Absolutely not. She needs privacy. What else do you have? We do have the VIP recovery suites on the top floor, the doctor said, hesitantly. They are private, have a view of the bay, and come with a dedicated concierge nurse. However, I must warn you, insurance does not cover the suite upgrades. The cost is substantial. It's roughly $1,200 a day, out of pocket. I gasped. $1,200? That's ridiculous. A double room is fine. I don't need a view. I'm going to be sleeping. Leah turned to me, her eyes cold. Wilma, stop. You worked hard your whole life. You have the savings. Why are you hoarding it? You deserve to be comfortable. She turned back to the doctor with a smug grin. Book the suite. And not just for the minimum stay. Let's keep her there for a full week to ensure she's stable before we move her to rehab. We want the full package. Private nursing, the upgraded meal plan, everything. I looked at Christopher. Son, that is nearly $10,000 just for the room. That's my emergency fund. Christopher shrugged, avoiding my eyes. It's your health, Mom. You can't put a price on that. Besides, Leah thinks it's better this way. I sat back in my chair. I watched Leah's face. She looked triumphant. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She thought she was spending my money. She thought she was burning through my bank account to give herself the satisfaction of playing the caring, wealthy daughter-in-law. She probably thought that if she drained my cash reserves now, they could justify selling my house sooner to pay for my care later. It was a power trip, pure and simple. Book it, Leah commanded, and put it on the bill. We want the invoice sent directly to us as her guardians. Certainly, Dr. Evans said, typing into his computer. I'll make a note that the guardians are authorizing the VIP upgrade and accepting responsibility for the charges. Exactly, Leah said. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed. Leah thought she was ordering room service on my credit card. She didn't realize she had just put a $10,000 charge on her own tab. The spending didn't stop there. On the day of the surgery, Leah showed up with a list of demands for the nursing staff. She requested a specific type of imported bottled water for my room. Charged to the room? Of course. She demanded I see the physical therapist twice as often as recommended, billed as extra services. She even ordered a catered meal for herself and Christopher to be delivered to my suite, telling the administrator, just add it to the patient's incidentals. I lay in that hospital bed, my hip throbbing, watching them from the corner of my eye. This salmon is delicious, Leah said, picking at her lunch while sitting on the plush guest sofa in my VIP suite. You know, Chris, we should have done this sooner. It's so much easier when we don't have to argue with her about every penny. Yeah, Christopher mumbled, watching the flat-screen TV on the wall. Nice room. I closed my eyes and feigned sleep. In my head, I was doing the math. VIP suite, $8,400. Private nursing upgrade, $2,500. Extra physical therapy, $1,200. Incidental luxury charges, $600. They had racked up over $12,000 in non-covered expenses in 4 days. And they had done it with such arrogance, such glee in overriding my wishes. Leah walked over to my bed and patted my hand. Rest up, Wilma. Don't worry about a thing. We're taking care of everything. You certainly are, I whispered, my voice groggy from the pain medication. You're taking care of it all. That's right, she cooed. We're in charge. I drifted off to sleep with a peaceful heart. I wasn't worried about the bill. I wasn't worried about the money, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to have to pay it. They were enjoying the penthouse experience now, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. Checkout time was coming, and the front desk was going to have a very interesting surprise for them. 5 days had passed since my surgery. I was currently residing in the recovery suite at the rehabilitation center, another exorbitant expense that Leah had insisted upon. The room looked more like a hotel than a medical facility. There were fresh orchids on the nightstand for 100 count sheets on the bed, and a menu that featured filet mignon instead of hospital gelatin. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the sailboats drift across the bay, when my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was an unsaved number, but the area code was local. I had a feeling I knew who it was. The hospital billing cycle usually takes a few days to process, but when VIP services are involved, the accounts receivable department tends to move a little faster. I answered the phone with my best, slightly frail. Hello, Mrs. Davis? A man's voice, sharp, professional, but with an underlying edge of tension. This is Arthur Sterling. I represent your son, Christopher, and his wife, Leah. Oh, hello, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice light. Is everything all right? Christopher isn't hurt, is he? No, everyone is physically fine, he said quickly. Mrs. Davis, I'm calling regarding the medical power of attorney document that was executed last week. Specifically, a financial query has arisen regarding your current stay at the Bayside Rehabilitation Center. I took a sip of my tea. A query? I don't understand. Christopher and Leah are handling all of that. They insisted. Yes, well, Sterling cleared his throat. I could hear papers shuffling on the other end of the line. There seems to be some confusion regarding the billing. The hospital and the rehab center have both forwarded the initial invoices directly to my clients, Christopher and Leah. They have denied payment, stating that these costs should be drawn from your personal estate. Denied payment? I let a gasp slip into my voice. But they ordered these services. Leah specifically requested the Bayview suite. She told the doctor money was no object. I understand that, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. However, my clients were under the impression that they were authorizing these expenses on your behalf to be paid from your assets. But the hospital legal team has flagged a specific clause in the power of attorney document. They are claiming that Christopher and Leah are personally liable. Oh, I said, innocently. Which clause is that? It's in the second paragraph. Sterling said. He sounded annoyed now, like he was talking to a dense child. It reads, the appointed guardians agree to assume full personal financial liability for all medical debts and facility costs incurred under their direction. Mrs. Davis, did you write this? I typed it myself. I said proudly. I wanted to make sure everything was clear. Mrs. Davis, the lawyer sighed, a long, weary sound. I need to ask you this very clearly. Did you explain to my clients that by signing this, they were agreeing to pay your medical bills out of their own pockets? Because they seem to be under the impression that this is a standard guardianship agreement. Mr. Sterling, I said, dropping the frail act just a fraction. My son and his wife came to my home. They told me I was too old to make my own decisions. They told me they wanted to take full responsibility for my care. They threatened to put me in a state home if I didn't sign. I simply gave them what they asked for. Full responsibility. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. They signed it, didn't they? I asked gently. They did, Sterling muttered. But they didn't read the fine print. My late husband was an accountant. I said, he always taught Christopher to read before signing. Are you telling me my son signed a legal contract without reading it? That doesn't sound very responsible for a guardian, does it? Sterling didn't answer that. He pivoted. Mrs. Davis, the current bill for the surgery and the first 4 days of VIP recovery is just over $14,000. My clients, they do not have that kind of liquidity available immediately. I knew that. Christopher and Leah lived a life financed by credit cards and leases. They drove nice cars, but they didn't own anything. They were waiting for me to die so they could pay off their debts. Oh dear, I said, that is a problem. But, Mr. Sterling, surely you aren't suggesting that I pay for it? I didn't order the VIP suite. I was happy with a double room. Leah was the one who demanded the upgrades. She said I deserved the premium experience. Why would she order something she couldn't pay for? They assumed your estate would cover it. Sterling snapped, losing his cool for a second. But the contract says otherwise. I reminded him. And since they are the ones making the decisions, they are the ones incurring the costs. That's only fair, isn't it? If I go to a restaurant and order a steak for my friend, the restaurant expects me to pay for it, not my friend. Mrs. Davis, the lawyer's voice became cold. If this clause is enforced, it could cause significant financial hardship for your son. We may have to look into voiding the document based on lack of clarity, or perhaps deception. Deception? I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Mr. Sterling, there was no deception. The font was the same size as the rest of the text. It was right above the signature line. If they try to void the document, then I suppose that means they are resigning as my guardians. He hesitated. Well, because if they resign, I continued, then I regain control of my medical decisions. And the first thing I will do is check myself out of this expensive suite and go home. But as long as they hold that power of attorney, as long as they refuse to let me make my own choices, they have to pay the price of admission. You can't have the authority without the liability, Mr. Sterling. That's not how the world works. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He was stuck. If they voided the document to get out of the debt, they lost control over me and my assets. If they kept the document to keep control, they had to pay the bills. I will need to speak with my clients. Sterling said, his voice defeated. You do that, I said, and please remind Christopher that the bill for next week's physical therapy is due on Tuesday. Leah ordered the extra sessions, so I imagine she'll want to stay on top of that. Goodbye, Mrs. Davis. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the side table next to the vase of orchids. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was the first time in years I had felt this powerful. For days, I had felt like a piece of furniture, something to be moved around, stored, and eventually sold. But in that 5-minute phone call, the dynamic had shifted. They weren't calling the shots anymore. They were writing the checks. I picked up the room service menu. I wasn't hungry, but I looked at the prices. Lobster bisque, $28. Imported sparkling water, $12. Leah had ordered this for me. She wanted me to have the best. I picked up the room phone and dialed the kitchen. Yes, this is Mrs. Davis in Suite 402. I said cheerfully, I'd like to order dinner. And could you please send up a bottle of sparkling cider? The expensive kind. My daughter-in-law insists. I hung up and looked out at the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was going to be a beautiful evening. I hoped Christopher and Leah were having a pleasant evening, too, discussing their finances with Mr. Sterling. The panic in the lawyer's voice was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. They wanted to play a game with my life. They wanted to gamble with my future. They just didn't realize that the house always wins. And this was my house. The room service waiter knocked softly on the door, breaking the silence that had settled over the room after I hung up on Mr. Sterling. He wheeled in a cart covered in a white linen cloth. On it sat a steaming bowl of lobster bisque, a basket of warm sourdough rolls, and the bottle of sparkling cider I had requested. "Will there be anything else, Mrs. Davis?" he asked politely. "No, thank you," I said, signing the receipt with a flourish. I looked at the bottom line. $48 for soup and juice. I added a generous $10 tip. After all, Christopher could afford it. Or, at least, he was about to find out he had to. As I ate the soup, which was admittedly delicious, the adrenaline from the phone call began to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy sensation in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't indigestion. It was the truth. It was the undeniable, heartbreaking reality that I had been trying to ignore for weeks. For a long time, I made excuses for them. Even when they threatened me with the nursing home, a small, foolish part of my heart whispered, maybe they really are just worried. Maybe they see me getting older, and they're scared. A mother always wants to believe the best of her child. You remember them as the toddler who brought you a dandelion from the yard, not the man trying to force you to sign legal papers. But Mr. Sterling's words had stripped away that last layer of denial. They assumed your estate would cover it. That was the slip. That was the confession. They hadn't ordered the VIP suite because they wanted me to be comfortable. They hadn't demanded the extra therapy because they wanted me to walk again. They did it because they thought they were spending my money. They were treating my savings account like an all-you-can-eat buffet. I put down my spoon. The soup suddenly tasted bland. I looked around the luxurious room. This wasn't a recovery suite to them. It was a waiting room. They were parking me here, keeping me comfortable and quiet while they waited for the inevitable. They probably already had a plan for the house. I could imagine Leah walking through my rooms, putting sticky notes on the things she wanted to keep and calling an estate liquidator for the rest. They likely had a realtor lined up to list the property the moment I was permanently placed in a facility. They didn't see a mother. They saw a net worth. I stood up and walked to the window, leaning heavily on my walker. My hip was sore, but the pain in my chest was worse. I thought about Christopher, my Christopher, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the teenager I sat up with when he had his first heartbreak. How did he become this? I knew the answer. It wasn't just Leah. It's easy to blame the daughter-in-law, to paint her as the villain and my son as the helpless victim. But Christopher is a grown man. He stood in my kitchen. He held the pen. He heard her threaten to lock me away, and he said nothing. He chose his wife's greed over his mother's dignity. He sold me out for the promise of an early inheritance. A tear finally escaped, hot and angry, tracking down my cheek. I let it fall. I let myself feel the grief of it. I was mourning the living. The son I loved was effectively gone, replaced by this stranger who looked at me and saw dollar signs. But as I stood there, looking out at the darkening bay, something shifted. The grief didn't disappear, but it hardened. It crystallized into something sharp and useful. They thought I was a feeble old woman. They thought I was a problem to be managed, a liability to be minimized. They had underestimated me. They forgot that before I was a grandmother, before I was a mother, I was a woman who navigated life on my own terms. I managed a household budget through 3 recessions. I cared for a dying husband with my own 2 hands. I have survived heartbreak and loss that would bring Leah to her knees. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I looked at the phone sitting on the table. Mr. Sterling was probably calling them right now. I could picture the scene. Christopher's face draining of color. Leah screaming that it wasn't fair, that there must be a mistake. They were finally realizing that the control they fought so hard for was a double-edged sword, and they were holding it by the blade. A grim smile touched my lips. I realized then that I held the leash. As long as they wanted to play guardian, they had to pay the guardian's toll. If they wanted to stop paying, they would have to admit defeat and give me my life back. I wasn't just protecting my money anymore. I was teaching them a lesson about respect. A lesson about what happens when you try to bully someone who has been independent for longer than you've been alive. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the scared, confused lady they had ambushed in the kitchen. She was tired, yes. She had wrinkles and gray hair, but her eyes were clear. They were fierce. Pull yourself together. Wilma, I told my reflection. They're coming. I knew they would come. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. They would come storming in here, demanding answers, trying to intimidate me into fixing their mistake. They would try to use guilt, anger, maybe even tears. Let them come. I walked back to the bed and adjusted the pillows. I picked up my book, but I didn't read. I just sat there, waiting. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a soldier who has finished digging their trench and is simply waiting for the enemy to cross the line. They wanted to be in charge of my life. Fine. They could explain to the hospital why the check hadn't cleared. They could explain to the physical therapist why they were canceling sessions. They could explain to the world why they were so desperate to control a mother they refused to support. I took a sip of the sparkling cider. It was crisp and cold. The mask was off. The pretense of family concern was gone. Now it was just business. And in business, as Arthur always taught me, you never sign a deal you can't afford. My son and his wife had signed the deal of a lifetime, and I was going to make sure they got exactly what they paid for. The elevator chimed down the hall. Heavy footsteps approached. I straightened my spine. It was showtime. I was wrong. They didn't come to the rehab center that night. They were too cowardly to cause a scene in front of doctors and nurses. They waited until I was discharged, until I was back within the 4 walls of my own home, where they thought I would be vulnerable. I had been home for exactly 3 hours. I was sitting in my favorite wingback chair by the fireplace, a cup of chamomile tea resting on the side table. My hip was still stiff, and I had my walker position nearby. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like the queen of my castle. The silence was peaceful. Then, the front door flew open. They didn't knock. They didn't unlock it gently. They barged in with such force that the framed picture of Arthur on the hallway table rattled against the wall. Wilma! Leah's voice screeched, echoing off the high ceilings. I didn't get up. I didn't flinch. I just took a slow sip of my tea and watched them storm into the living room. Christopher looked terrible. His face was a pale, sickly shade of gray, and he was sweating despite the cool air conditioning. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. Leah, on the other hand, looked like a wild animal cornered in a cage. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were wide and manic, and she was clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her fist like a weapon. Hello, Christopher. Hello, Leah, I said calmly. It's polite to knock. Cut the act, Wilma. Leah shouted, slamming the crumpled paper down onto the coffee table. In front of me. What is this? What the hell is this? I glanced down at the paper. It was the invoice from the medical center. The bold red letters at the bottom were visible even from where I sat. Past due, $14,250. That appears to be a bill, I said, setting my teacup down. For the VIP suite, and the private nursing, and the lobster bisque, and the imported water. I looked up at her, meeting her gaze squarely. The services you ordered, Leah. You tricked us, she screamed, her voice cracking. You added that line in the contract. You knew we didn't read it. I didn't trick anyone, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I typed a document. I handed it to my son. I asked him to read it. He chose not to. He chose to sign his name to a legal promise that he would take full responsibility for my care. Isn't that what you wanted? Full control. We wanted to manage your care. Leah yelled, pacing back and forth on my Persian rug. We didn't agree to go bankrupt for it. This is unfair. It's entrapment. Entrapment. I let out a dry laugh. Leah, you stood in this very room and threatened to put me in a state facility if I didn't sign over my rights. You bullied an old woman into giving up her autonomy. And now you're crying because the power you stole came with a price tag. I turned my eyes to my son. He hadn't said a word yet. He was staring at the floor, wringing his hands. Christopher, I said softer, but with an edge. Look at me. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. You said you wanted to take care of me. I said, you said you were worried about my safety. If that was true, why are you upset about paying for the best care possible? Shouldn't you be happy? I had a view of the bay. While I recovered, shouldn't you be happy? I'm safe. Mom, please, he croaked. His voice was weak. We can't pay this. You know we can't pay this. Why not? I asked, feigning ignorance. You both have jobs. You drive a Mercedes. You go on vacations. Surely $14,000 is a small price to pay for your mother's health. We don't have it. Christopher snapped, the pressure finally breaking him. We don't have the money, Mom. We're drowning. The room went silent. Leah stopped pacing and froze, shooting a warning glare at Christopher, but it was too late. The dam had burst. What do you mean, you're drowning? I asked. Christopher slumped onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. The business, it hasn't been doing well for a year. We maxed out the credit cards trying to keep up appearances. The lease on the cars is overdue. We have a balloon payment on our house due next month. If we don't pay it, we lose everything. I sat there, processing his words. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. They were living a lie, a shiny, expensive lie, and they needed my money to keep the facade from crumbling. So that's it, I said quietly. You weren't worried about my hip. You weren't worried about my dizziness. You were worried about your balloon payment. Christopher didn't answer. He just wept into his hands. We needed access to your accounts. Leah spat out, abandoning her pretense of caring. She crossed her arms, defensive and nasty. You have all this money sitting here, doing nothing. A paid-off house. A retirement fund. And you're just one old woman. We are your family. We are struggling. It's selfish of you to hoard it while we suffer. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical slap. I gripped the arms of my chair. I worked for 40 years, Leah. Arthur and I scraped and saved. We didn't take vacations. We didn't drive luxury cars we couldn't afford. We built this safety net so that I wouldn't be a burden on anyone. And you call me selfish because I won't let you light my safety net on fire to keep yourselves warm. It's our inheritance. Leah yelled. It's going to be ours eventually. Anyway, why does it matter if we use it now? Because I am not dead yet. I shouted back, my voice rising for the first time. I grabbed my cane and stood up. The pain in my hip flared, but I ignored it. I needed to be standing for this. I am still here, I said, pointing a shaking finger at them. I am a living, breathing human being. I am not an ATM machine. I am not a piggy bank waiting to be smashed open. I looked at my son, who was still crying on the sofa. He looked pathetic. I felt a wave of pity, but it was quickly washed away by disgust. You gambled, I told them. You gambled on me being weak. You gambled on me being stupid. You thought you could sign a paper, toss me in a home, and cash out. But you didn't read the rules of the game. We're not paying it. Leah hissed. We'll fight this. Mr. Sterling says we can sue you for fraud. Go ahead. I challenged her. Sue me. Drag your mother into court. Tell the judge how you tried to force me into a home. Tell the judge how you ordered VIP services you couldn't afford. My lawyer is ready, and I promise you, by the time we are done, the legal fees will cost you more than that hospital bill. Christopher looked up, panic in his eyes. Mom, don't. Please. Just pay the bill from your savings. Please. We'll tear up the power of attorney. We'll walk away. Just make this go away. He was begging. My son, the man I raised to be strong and honorable, was begging me to bail him out of a trap he set for himself. I can't do that, Christopher. I said softly. Why not? He pleaded. Because you signed a contract, I said, sitting back down. And in the real world, actions have consequences. You wanted to be the guardian. You wanted the title. You bought it. Now you have to pay for it. We can't, he whispered. Then you better start selling things, I said, picking up my tea again. I hear those Mercedes hold their value quite well. Leah let out a scream of frustration and stormed toward the door. Come on, Chris. She's insane. We're leaving. Christopher stood up slowly. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes anymore, just fear and resentment. He followed his wife out the door. They slammed it shut behind them. I sat in the silence, listening to their car engine roar to life and speed away. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. I was shaking from the sheer effort of holding back my rage. They had admitted it. They admitted they viewed my life as nothing more than a barrier to their financial comfort. They were willing to sacrifice me to save their own skins. I looked at the crumpled invoice on the coffee table. $14,250. It was a lot of money, but as I sat there in my quiet, paid-off house, I realized it was a bargain. It was the price of freedom. It was the price of knowing exactly who my family really was. But I wasn't done yet. They thought this was the end. They thought the bill was the punishment. No, the bill was just the tuition. The final exam was still to come. I didn't hear from my son for 3 days after he stormed out of my house. There were no apology texts, no visits, no pleading phone calls. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm. I knew they weren't done. Leah wasn't the type to walk away from $14,000 without scratching and clawing. She would rather burn the bridge completely than pay the toll. I used those 3 days wisely. I didn't sit around knitting. I called an old friend of Arthur's, a man named Robert Vance. Robert is an attorney who specializes in elder law. He's about my age, sharp as a tack, and has zero patience for bullies. I told him everything, the threats, the ambush in my kitchen, the VIP suite, and the invoice. Robert listened, asked for copies of the documents, and then told me exactly what to do when the phone rang. And the phone did ring. On Thursday morning, just as I was finishing my breakfast toast. It was Mr. Sterling again. But this time, the confusion in his voice was gone. It was replaced by aggression. He wasn't calling to clarify. He was calling to attack. Mrs. Davis, he barked the moment I picked up. We are done playing games. I have drafted a waiver of liability. I am emailing it to you now. You need to print it, sign it, and return it within the hour. Good morning to you too, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm afraid I can't do that. You don't have a choice, he snapped. He sounded desperate, like a man whose clients were screaming in his ear. If you do not sign this waiver releasing Christopher and Leah from this debt, we will file a civil suit against you for fraud, entrapment, and acting in bad faith. We will tie up your assets in litigation for years. We will freeze your accounts. You won't be able to buy a loaf of bread without a judge's permission. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a terrifying threat. To have my bank accounts frozen, to be dragged through court at 72, it was exactly the kind of nightmare scenario that makes seniors cave in. They count on the fear. They count on the fact that we just want peace. You are threatening to sue your client's mother because she let them sign a document they didn't read. I asked, we are arguing that you manipulated the contract with malicious intent. Sterling said, his voice dripping with venom. You tricked them. No judge will look kindly on a mother bankrupting her own child. Sign the waiver. Wilma, it's the only way you walk away from this with your reputation intact. He paused, letting the silence stretch, waiting for me to break. He expected tears. He expected me to beg. Instead, I pressed the add call button on my screen. That is a very interesting legal theory, Mr. Sterling, I said calmly. But I think you should run it by my attorney before you file anything. Hold on a moment. I merged the call. Robert, I said, are you there? I'm here, Wilma. Robert's deep, gravelly voice filled the line. And I'm recording. There was a sharp intake of breath on Sterling's end. Who is this? This is Robert Vance, my lawyer announced. I represent Mrs. Wilma Davis. And I must say, Arthur, in my 40 years of practice, I have never heard a colleague threaten a senior citizen with frivolous litigation quite so brazenly. Mr. Vance, Sterling stammered, his aggressive tone vanishing instantly. I wasn't informed that Mrs. Davis had retained counsel. We are simply trying to resolve a billing dispute. You were trying to intimidate a witness, Vance corrected him, his voice hard as steel. I have reviewed the power of attorney document. It is ironclad. Your clients, Christopher and Leah Davis, entered into a binding agreement to assume financial liability. They exercised that power to incur $14,000 in luxury medical expenses. There is no fraud. There is only buyer's remorse. My clients were misled regarding the terms. Sterling argued, though his voice was weak. They are adults. Vance shot back. They signed a contract. But let's talk about your threat to sue Arthur. Go ahead. File your motion for fraud, because the moment you do, I will file a countersuit on behalf of Mrs. Davis. A countersuit? Sterling asked. Yes, Vance continued, sounding almost bored. We will be filing for elder financial abuse. We have testimony that your clients threatened to force Mrs. Davis into an assisted living facility against her, unless she signed over control of her medical care. That is extortion. That is coercion. And in the state of California, Elder abuse carries not just civil penalties, but potential criminal charges. The line went dead silent. Criminal charges? Sterling whispered. If we go to discovery, Vance said, we will subpoena their financial records. We will show the court that they are in debt, that they have balloon payments due, and that their motivation for seeking guardianship was not to care for Mrs. Davis, but to seize control of her assets for their own gain. We will paint a picture of two predatory children trying to exploit their mother. And the press? Oh, the local news loves a story about elder abuse. I sat in my kitchen, clutching the phone, listening to Robert dismantle them piece by piece. It was beautiful. So, Vance concluded, you can file your suit, Arthur, and I will make sure Christopher and Leah spend the next 5 years in court explaining why they tried to extort a 72-year-old widow. Or they can pay the bill they owe, resign as guardians immediately, and never threaten Mrs. Davis again. What's it going to be? The silence stretched for 10 seconds. I could almost hear Sterling sweating. He knew he had lost. He knew his clients had lied to him about their innocent intentions. He knew that if this went to court, Christopher and Leah wouldn't just be bankrupt. They could be looking at jail time. I will speak to my clients, Sterling said, his voice barely audible. We will withdraw the threat of litigation. And the bill? Vance pressed. They will handle the bill, Sterling said tightly. We will send over the resignation of guardianship by the end of the day. See that you do, Vance said. Good day, Arthur. The line clicked. Sterling was gone. Robert, I breathed out, leaning back in my chair. Thank you. Don't thank me, Wilma, Robert chuckled. You gave them the rope. I just tightened the knot. They won't bother you again. They're too scared of what we know. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. The sunlight was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest for weeks finally lifted. They had tried to bully me. They had tried to scare me. But they forgot that I come from a generation that doesn't break easily. I had faced down life, death, and hardship. A greedy daughter-in-law and a loudmouthed lawyer were nothing compared to what I had survived. It was over. I had won. But as I sat there, the victory felt bittersweet. I had protected my home. I had protected my dignity. But I had lost my son. Or maybe I realized I hadn't lost him. Maybe he had been gone for a long time, and I was only just now accepting it. I stood up and walked to the fridge. I took down the photo of Christopher and Leah from the magnet clip. I looked at it for a moment, their smiling, fake faces, and then I dropped it into the trash can. I had one more thing to do. The silence was nice, but revenge is a dish best served cold. And I had one final course to serve them. The courier arrived at my door at 10 a.m. the next morning. He handed me a thick envelope from Robert Vance's office. Inside were the papers that would officially end this nightmare, the revocation of power of attorney. I took the pen from my kitchen drawer, the nice, heavy ballpoint pen Arthur gave me for our 30th anniversary. I laid the document on the counter. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt cleansed. I signed my name, Wilma Davis. With those 2 words, I took back my voice. I took back my body. I took back my life. I faxed the copy back to Robert's office, and he filed it with the county and the hospital immediately. Legally, Christopher and Leah were no longer my guardians. They were just my relatives again. Relatives who owed a very large bill. Speaking of the bill, I sat down with my checkbook. I looked at the invoice one last time, $14,250. Part of me wanted to leave them with every single penny of it. They deserved it. They had been willing to throw me away to save a few dollars, so why shouldn't I let them drown in the debt they created? But I stopped. I looked at the photo of Arthur on the mantelpiece. Arthur was a fair man. He taught me that justice isn't about cruelty. It's about balance. If I left them with the entire debt, I would be no better than them. I would be acting out of spite, not principle. And I am a mother. No matter how much they hurt me, I couldn't watch them completely destroy their lives over a hospital room. I wrote a check, but not for the full amount. I wrote it for exactly $7,125. Half. I slid it into an envelope addressed to the hospital billing department. I attached a small note, enclosed as payment for the standard portion of my care. The remaining balance for luxury upgrades is the sole responsibility of the party who authorized them. I smiled as I licked the stamp. I was saving them from bankruptcy, but I wasn't saving them from the sting. $7,000 was still a lot of money for people living paycheck to paycheck. It would hurt. They would have to sell something, maybe Leah's designer handbags or Christopher's golf clubs, to pay it off. That was their tuition fee. That was the cost of the lesson I had just taught them. Never underestimate a woman who manages her own checkbook. But I wasn't done. The revocation was defense. The check was justice. Now, it was time for the silent revenge. I drove to Robert's office that afternoon. The receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Davis," Robert said, shaking my hand, "you look 10 years younger than you did yesterday." "I feel it, Robert," I said. "I'm here to make one final change." "The will?" he asked. He knew. "The will?" I confirmed. We sat in his leather chairs. He pulled out the file, my last will and testament. For 20 years, it had remained the same. It stated that upon my death, my house, my savings, my jewelry, and all my worldly possessions would pass to my only son, Christopher Davis. It was a legacy Arthur and I had built for him. We wanted him to be secure, but security had made him weak, and the promise of money had made him cruel. "Delete it," I said. "All of it?" Robert asked, his pen hovering over the page. "All of it," I said firmly. "Remove Christopher as the beneficiary. Remove Leah. I don't want them to receive a single teaspoon from my kitchen. And the new beneficiary." I had thought about this all night. I didn't want the money to go to waste. I wanted it to go to people who actually understood what it meant to fight for their dignity. "The San Diego Women's Shelter," I said, "and the local animal rescue. Split it 50-50. The shelter helps women who have been abused and controlled get back on their feet." I think that's fitting." Robert smiled. A genuine, wide smile. "It is very fitting, Wilma." We drafted the new will. I signed it. 2 witnesses signed it. It was done. My house, my garden, my savings, it was all going to help women escape situations like the one I had just survived. It was going to feed stray dogs and give safe beds to terrified mothers. "One last thing," I said, handing Robert a sealed envelope. "I want you to send a copy of the new will to Christopher via certified mail. I want him to sign for it. I want him to hold it in his hands." "And the letter?" Robert asked, gesturing to the envelope. "Put this inside." I drove home, feeling lighter than air. 2 days later, I got the notification that the mail had been delivered. I pictured the scene. Christopher seeing the official legal envelope, his heart racing, thinking maybe I had died, or maybe I had caved in and sent him a check. He would tear it open, expecting a payday. Instead, he would find the legal decree that he had been disinherited, and clipped to the front, he would find my handwritten note. I knew the words by heart. "Dear Christopher, you and Leah spent so much time worrying about my assets that you forgot to worry about your mother. You wanted control. You have it now. You have total control over your own lives, your own debts, and your own future. I am no longer your safety net. I have decided to leave my estate to those who truly need help, women who are fighting to survive, not children waiting for a handout. I paid half the hospital bill because I am a good mother. I left you with the other half because you need to learn to be a good adult. Do not call me to argue. The decision is final. I hope you find a way to stand on your own 2 feet, just as I have. Love, Mom. I never heard from them after that. No angry phone calls. No visits. I suspect the shame was finally too much, or perhaps Robert's threat of an elder abuse lawsuit kept them at bay. Whatever the reason, the silence they left behind wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I spent the evening in my garden. The sun was going down, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. My hydrangeas were blooming, big bursts of blue and purple. I sat in my wicker chair with a fresh cup of tea. I thought about the future. I might sell the house one day and move into a condo, but it would be my decision. I might take a cruise. I might join a book club. The money was mine to enjoy now, not something to be hoarded for an ungrateful son. I took a sip of tea and looked at the empty chair beside me where Arthur used to sit. "We did good, Arthur," I whispered to the wind. "We raised him, but I had to finish raising him today." It hurts to cut ties with family. It leaves a scar. But I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. It's about care. And if someone is willing to take away your freedom to line their pockets, they aren't family. They are just people you used to know. I closed my eyes and listened to the birds singing in the orange tree. I was alone, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was free, and that is worth more than any house, any inheritance, or any VIP suite in the world. So, I leave you with this question. How far would you go to protect your dignity? Because I went all the way, and I don't regret a single step. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 4 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.